Welcome to How to Cook That. I'm Ann Reardon and this is episode 2 in our Dangerous Food series. Let's start with a case that made headlines all over the world.
5 people sit down to lunch, only 2 will survive.
Just can't believe it.
An Australian family's meal is now the centre of a homicide.
Police are refusing to rule out foul play after a deadly meal claimed 3
tragedy
lives.
now grabbing global headlines.
The 3 unnatural deaths.
Police have taken the cook into custody.
49-year-old Erin Patterson was arrested at
Today's arrest is just the next step in what has been a complex and thorough investigation.
That all happened right here in Victoria. A lady had 4 people over for lunch and by the next day they were not feeling well. By the end of the week, 3 of them had died and the 4th one had over a month in hospital and an emergency liver transplant to save his life. Now, the lady who cooked the lunch said she made a beef Wellington, which is beef wrapped in pastry with a mushroom paste. You do need quite a lot of mushrooms for this dish, and it's alleged that it may have contained death cap mushrooms. Whether that was the case and whether it was deliberate or accidental is now up to a jury to decide. But every year, nearly 100 people die from mushroom poisoning, with the main culprit being the death cap mushroom. It has that name for a reason. One death cap mushroom contains enough amatoxin to kill a human. And one of the problems is the symptoms are delayed. You won't feel sick for 6 to 24 hours later, depending how much of it you've had. And that delay causes an issue because there's no point inducing vomiting at that stage because you've already absorbed all of the toxin into your system. The first side effects that people get are severe stomach pain, violent vomiting, and very watery diarrhea, and lots of it for a couple of days. And then that might pass and they start to feel a little bit better. But that's just the beginning, because our bodies can't break down amatoxin. So the 2 organs that try and get rid of it are your kidneys, which tries to get rid of it in the urine, but the majority of it is filtered out by your liver, which usually breaks down toxins. But the amatoxin, it can't break down, so it gets excreted in the bile, which goes into your small intestine, which then gets absorbed and back into your bloodstream, and this cycle of destruction just continues with your liver and your kidneys taking the brunt of most of that, which sends people into renal failure and liver failure, and even with an emergency liver transplant, sometimes people still don't survive, depending how much of the toxin they've been exposed to. So current treatment involves giving charcoal every couple of hours to adsorb that toxin that's being excreted in the bile so that you're not getting it back into your bloodstream. Large doses of penicillin G seem to give some protective effect to the liver, but they're not sure why. There is no actual antidote to this. It's not like when you get bitten by a snake, if you get to the hospital fast enough, they just give you the antidote and you're all good. They don't have one. Late last year, there was a study that showed some promising effects of a medication called ICG, which is a medical dye for increasing survival rates, but that was in mice. And you can't just start a human study. You can't just feed people deadly poisonous mushrooms so we can check if this medication will work on them. You can only do it when people come in with an accidental poisoning. So how do you make sure you're not one of those accidental test subjects? Well, here in Australia and all over the world, there are so many different wild mushrooms growing, and some are very beautiful. And the death cap mushroom isn't the only poisonous one. So the general advice is don't eat wild mushrooms. It's just not worth the risk. However, in a statement, the lady who made the beef Wellington said that she used button mushrooms from the local supermarket and also some dried mushrooms from an Asian grocery store. That statement made mushroom sales plummet in Australia because everybody was worried there were going to be death caps in the mushrooms they bought from the store. So what does a death cap look like? I'm going to let Alison explain that.
G'day, my name's Alison Poulio. I'm an ecologist with a particular interest in fungi. The pileus of the death cap starts out ovoid or hemispherical, then becomes convex, expanding to plane. The colour can be highly variable, from white to pale yellow to pale brown to various shades of green. The surface is smooth, often shiny, or with a metallic lustre. The lamellae are white, close or crowded, and free from the stipe. The stipe is generally equal in diameter along its length, with a prominent bulbous base contained within a sac-like membranous vulva. Also note the white membranous partial veil on the upper stipe.
So death caps look quite varied depending where they are in their life cycle, but they don't look like these ones that I picked up from my local supermarket. And if you're worried, you can just cut it in half and you can see there that the gills on these little button mushrooms are brown. And this is a Swiss brown, which has brown gills, and this is a portobello with the dark brown gills. Now the gills on a death cap are white, so you can be assured that these are not death caps. Now I am not saying to you that you can go and pick any wild mushroom that has brown gills and that will be safe. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm encouraging you to buy them from the supermarket. The other reason why ones from the supermarket are going to be safe is because commercial mushroom growers don't just go and pick them out from the field. They grow them under very controlled conditions of lighting, humidity and temperature so that they can maximize yield. And in this sort of setup, it is impossible to grow a death cap mushroom. And that's because death cap mushrooms are very special. They live in symbiosis with certain types of trees, like oak trees and beech trees. As well as the mushroom that you see above the ground, under the ground, they grow these little filaments that are tiny and they wrap themselves around the roots of the tree. Now this is actually helpful to the tree because it increases the surface area of the root for absorbing moisture and nutrients from the ground, but it's also helpful to the mushroom because it in return gets sugars from the tree. Now without that tree it can't grow, so that's why I said it's impossible for it to grow at the commercial mushroom farms. You'll often see them growing in a ring around one of those trees. Do not eat them. Don't eat wild mushrooms. Okay, now moving on to a completely different case of a problem of something that could be on your food. A very fit 19-year-old young guy was hanging with his mates when they saw a slug crawling across the floor. And as a dare, one of them picked it up and ate it. Pretty gross, but I can imagine that happening. The next day, he started to get intense pains in his legs and then headaches caused by meningitis, which is the layer that surrounds your brain getting inflamed, and then because that's swollen it puts pressure on your brain, so severe headaches. He ended up going into a coma and he didn't wake up for over a year, and when he did he was partially paralyzed. Now this is a severe case. He ended up dying 7 years later from complications, but it was not caused by the slug itself. It was caused by a parasite that lives inside the slug, and that parasite is called rat lungworm. From the name you can tell it's not slugs, it's rat. It's usually primary host is in rats, but then when rats do poos, in those feces is little larvae for the worms, and slugs come along and eat the rat poos, and that's how they end up having lots of the little larvae inside them. And then if you eat that slug or a snail, you end up having rat lungworm. It will then go through your system. It doesn't survive in people. We are not a good primary host for it. We're like an accidental host, but those worms will make their way to your brain where they then die. Now your brain's response to having those foreign bodies is to swell and to have an immune response and try and get rid of it, but then the swelling is what causes the issues. A rapid treatment with steroids can help limit the symptoms, but people who have survived this say they're living with lifelong nerve damage and consequences of it.
My doctors have told me there's nothing more they can do for me.
The half right-hand side of my body is way more sensitive than the left-hand side, and like I have a permanent sunburn.
Severe pain in about a third of my body. Skin pain so bad that if I didn't have any pain relief, I wouldn't have wanted to live.
A study from 2022 found that it's not just snails and slugs that can give people rat lungworm. There have been cases of people getting it from eating raw or undercooked lizards, centipedes, toads, frogs, prawns, crabs, or even fish. Now, in case you're thinking this is just another dangerous thing in Australia, it actually started in Asia, and this is a map of the world of where you can find rat lungworm, and it's predicted to spread to these countries next. The majority of cases in humans are coming from snails or slugs, so don't eat them even on a dare, which seems to be a problem particularly for the guys. This young man ate a slug for a $10 dare, and there were 2 soldiers who were racing snails, and the agreement was the loser had to eat a snail, which he did, and he got rat lungworm, which is a pretty heavy price to pay. Now, avoiding deliberately eating them, now that you know that it's a problem, is pretty easy to do. But other people are getting rat lungworm from accidentally ingesting snails or slugs on salads or in smoothies.
The newly hatched babies of some of those slugs are only, say, about 1/4 of an inch long when they hatch out of the eggs. And they're not dark brown or grey, they're pretty much translucent. And so very, very difficult to see, or at least unless you're really looking for them. So that's why it's so important. And one of those little babies could have picked up thousands of worm larvae.
So make sure you wash your leafy greens super well under running water to make sure there are no slugs or snails hiding anywhere on them. If you're enjoying the Dangerous Food series, make sure you let me know by liking, commenting, sharing and subscribing. With thanks to my amazing patrons for all of your support. You guys are wonderful and it's a big encouragement to me. Make it a great week by being kind to others, and I'll see you on Friday.